The knights were in full fan mode, shouting her name like she was a celebrity instead of a knight. Some were practically waving glowing sticks, yelling, "Leona Everhart, we love you." Like today was a festival instead of a military appointment. The media pushed in next. One reporter asked the obvious question, pointing out that Leona had entered and graduated as top of her class from the Imperial Knighthood Academy's department, and was now officially the first woman ever assigned to the Central Branch Division. What did she think about making history? Leona smiled brightly and thanked everyone for coming to support her. And she knew exactly why they were here. The Central Division didn't recruit just anyone. They only picked the absolute top of the academy. It was also famous for being painfully conservative. A female rookie getting in wasn't just rare. It had literally never happened before. This wasn't luck or favoritism. It was proof that Leona's skill was simply impossible to ignore. She promised she wouldn't bring shame to her position, but the crowd exploded again before she could even finish her speech. A group of bald mages started flexing their muscles and cheering a name that instantly ruined her mood. "It's Regan Clanford, the magical genius himself." Regan even shoved past Leona like he owned the place, telling her to move aside. That made her eye twitch in irritation. Of course, of all people, it had to be him. And worse, he was also assigned to the Central Branch, which meant 3 full years of seeing his face every single day. The knights immediately turned on Regan's bald fan club mages, yelling at them to get lost and warning them not to mess with Leona, because she'd flatten Regan with one punch. The bald mages fired back, claiming Regan could wipe out the entire area with a single wave of his hand if he wanted to. Before things could spiral completely out of control, a photographer stepped in and asked for a simple photo of the two of them shaking hands. Regan scowled and started to complain, until Leona jabbed him sharply in the side. She plastered on a bright smile and agreed, before he could finish protesting. In situations like this, it was better to get it over with and move on. The photographer began counting down. The moment their hands touched, both of them froze. Leona felt it immediately, a strange tingling sensation shooting through her hand. Then an unfamiliar voice echoed in their head. "Finally, after 3 years, I finally succeeded." Judging by how stiff Regan suddenly became, he felt and heard it too. Before they could even ask each other what just happened, someone informed them that the commander was waiting. Later, they were formally welcomed by Miles, the commander of the Central Division. Miles casually mentioned that he'd heard the two of them were always together back at the academy. Regan immediately said that was news to him, while Leona called it completely false. The commander laughed it off, reminisced briefly about his own academy days, and then dropped the real news. Despite it being their very first day, the two of them would be paired together on missions from now on. Miles explained that the assignment came directly from the temple itself. It was a long-term investigation, and the first time the Central Division would be working hand-in-hand with the temple. The mission carried serious weight. The reputation of the Special Forces was on the line. Leona felt her heart skip. The temple didn't randomly assign rookies, especially not on their first day. Then the commander added the incentive. If they completed the mission successfully, their mandatory service would be reduced from 3 years to just 1. 2 whole years gone. That alone could change her entire future. Leona immediately raised her hand in agreement, but Regan refused on the spot. He flat out said he wouldn't partner with Leona under any circumstances, and pointed out that new recruits were usually paired with seniors. The commander admitted that was true, but reminded him it was tradition, not an actual rule. Regan didn't care. He said he valued that tradition and intended to follow it. Leona snapped back, asking if he was serious. 2 years off their service wasn't something you casually threw away. Regan shot her a sharp look and fired back, asking if she was serious. After all their clashes at the academy, did she really want to work with him? He even muttered something about knighthood department graduates being painfully simple-minded. The commander sighed, clearly unimpressed by the bickering. Then he slid a token across his desk. He explained that the temple was eager to meet the two of them as soon as possible. Together, they were to take the token and report to the Holy See by the end of the day. The commander smiled and wished them luck, making it clear that their team-up was no longer optional. Soon enough, Leona and Regan found themselves stuffed into the same carriage, rolling toward the Holy See. Leona sat there, already irritated. Regan had insisted he couldn't read while riding a horse, which, in her opinion, was just another excuse. If they had traveled on horseback, They would have arrived ages ago. Plus, splitting up on their very first day as partners would have looked strange. Meanwhile, Regan was completely absorbed in a book, calm as ever. Leona squinted at the cover. Dimensional Dynamics. Then, out of nowhere, a notification appeared, stating that a connection to dimensional streaming had been activated. Leona opened her mouth to comment, but Regan shut her down without even looking up. He said he was concentrating and asked her to stay quiet. Suddenly, the carriage jolted violently, shaking hard enough to rattle their seats. In an instant, Regan was pinning Leona against her seat to stay steady. At the same time, he caught a faint, sweet, intoxicating scent lingering in the air. That didn't make sense. Leona noticed his strange pause and frowned, asking what he was doing. Regan quickly scrambled back to his seat and muttered a stiff apology. Blushing, he tried to focus, but that sweet scent still lingered in his senses. Leona, never one to hold back, told him he should have trained his legs more. Weakling was the word she chose to describe him. He immediately fired back, saying that being a mage didn't mean he skipped physical training. Out of nowhere, a notification screen flashed, displaying a comment that Operation Love Fragrance was so close to succeeding. Sensing nearby magical activity, Leona instantly reached for her sword, while Regan cast Detection and Dispel Invisibility spells. Instead of an enemy, however, they were both stunned to find a tiny being floating before them. Leona guessed it was a new type of magical creature, and casually suggested splitting the discovery reward 50-50. Regan said she could take the money. He wanted the honor. The little being suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs, demanding to know why these two only ever got along at moments like this. A few moments later, after plenty of dramatic crying, she introduced herself as the Great Spirit, Sylphian. Both Leona and Regan stared at her blankly, silently agreeing that the so-called Great Spirit looked incredibly dopey. She explained that 500 years ago, during the war with the demon world, she had used all her power to seal the Demon King. Her true body was currently asleep to recover, and this form was merely a spiritual projection. Regan processed the information quickly and summed it up in simpler terms. She was basically Sylphian's avatar. She waved it off and told them to just call her an angel. Most of her power and memories were gone anyway, so the title worked fine. She added that she was only following the mission her true body had left behind. When asked what that mission was, the angel hesitated before admitting it was to protect the hero who would one day save the world. Leona's eyes sparkled. She immediately assumed the mission had something to do with her and declared that she'd wanted to be a hero ever since she was a child. The angel nervously corrected her. It wasn't Leona. Leona panicked and instantly pointed at Regan, begging the angel not to say it was him. To her, Regan was exactly the type who would destroy the world out of spite if things annoyed him too much. Regan calmly corrected her, saying he wouldn't destroy the world just because he disliked something. The angel fidgeted and admitted that it wasn't him either. In truth, the hero was neither of them. It would be their future child. The carriage fell into complete silence. The angel explained that the child born from Leona and Regan would be the one to save the world. Tearfully, she admitted that she'd been trying to push them together for 3 whole years and had failed spectacularly. Everything suddenly made sense to Leona. All those coincidences at the academy weren't accidents at all. Tripping during the entrance ceremony, getting caught in Regan's experiment and setting her hair on fire, fighting him during the cultural festival. None of it had been random. Regan immediately protested and reminded her of the part she conveniently skipped, the time she dumped water on him, forcing him to give his matriculation oath soaking wet, or the misunderstanding where she attacked him even though he'd done nothing wrong, leaving him with a bruised face for 2 full weeks, all thanks to Leona. The two quickly fell into their usual back-and-forth bickering. The angel completely broke down, apologizing non-stop and calling herself useless and incompetent, dragging even her true form into the self-hate spiral. When Leona asked what exactly the angel wanted them to do, Little Angel answered nervously that Leona had to give birth to the child who would save the world. Leona's mind went blank. Of all people, it had to be Regan. The thought alone was a nightmare. Beside, she was a knight sworn to protect the nation, and pregnancy would interfere with everything she'd worked for. But if saving the world required sacrifice, she was prepared to make it. Stiffly, she asked if they should just do it for the sake of the world, awkwardly holding up her finger as if proposing the deed. Regan snapped back that maybe the knighthood department had questionable standards, but he wasn't sleeping with someone out of obligation. Leona exploded, furious that he dismissed it so easily after she'd forced herself to say it out loud. She accused him of being the one who should feel embarrassed. That was when the angel screamed. She declared that a loveless physical relationship was absolutely not the solution. The child had to be born from true love to vanquish the coming evil, or the plan wouldn't work at all. Leona immediately shouted that there was no way she could ever fall in love with him. Regan, now frowning, asked what exactly this evil was that threatened to destroy the world. The angel explained that the Demon King would soon descend upon their world. She admitted her avatar body was designed to awaken once the Demon King's seal weakened, and the recent appearance of demonic beasts proved it was already happening. These creatures existed only to kill, spread chaos, and amplify negative emotions. Regan thought it through and suggested that if they eliminated the demonic beasts, they could prevent the Demon King from descending altogether. Leona agreed instantly without hesitation. Regan added that he didn't believe he was capable of loving anyone, but even if he somehow were, he would never wish for his child to suffer for the sake of saving the world. Which was why Leona proposed handling it themselves and wiping out every demonic beast. The angel admitted it wasn't impossible, but facing the Demon King directly would be extremely difficult. She still believed it would be far easier if they simply fell in love. Regan calmly rejected that idea. If that was the angel's wish, then he would continue acting exactly as he always had. To him, if 3 years of forced romance planning hadn't worked, then even 300 years wouldn't change anything. He would never fall in love with Leona. Regan proposed finding their own way to save the world, keeping the romance route as a backup plan in case everything else failed. Leona agreed, and the two sealed the decision without hesitation. And just like that, an alliance was formed, one that was absolutely not what the angel had wanted. Angel disappeared, but not before warning the two that she had been holding back on her shipping goals, because they were minors. This time, however, she was going all out and making full use of something called dimensional streaming. Of course, neither of them had any idea what that even meant, so they simply continued their journey to the temple. A priest guided them inside and asked them to wait, explaining that High Priest Nathaniel was still offering his prayers. Regan hadn't expected to immediately run into someone as big fish as Nathaniel. Leona looked confused and asked if Regan even knew who that was. Regan reminded her, though with obvious judgment, that this was basic knowledge from chapel lectures back at the academy. Leona shrugged it off instantly. No one actually listened to those lectures, and she said it like it was common sense. Anyway, Nathaniel was a high priest favored to become the next pope. He'd made history just last year by becoming the youngest high priest ever, and the entire continent had been obsessed with him ever since. Leona's eyes widened as realization hit her. This must be that guy, the one known as Sylphian's Gift, the rumored dreamboat whose face alone was said to bring peace to the continent. Regan dryly pointed out that she didn't know his name, yet somehow knew his face by reputation. Leona, completely unashamed, replied that rumors traveled fast. She admitted she was excited to finally see him in person, and even planned to ask for an autograph. Regan glanced at her and felt an unfamiliar irritation rise in his chest. The reason was painfully obvious. She was practically grinning like a fool, just because Nathaniel was handsome. That alone annoyed him more than he wanted to admit, especially since she'd shown zero reaction to him this entire time. Bro, that was jealousy. But nope, you weren't ready to acknowledge it. Nathaniel soon approached with a gentle smile, apologizing for the wait as he greeted them warmly. Leona introduced herself politely, and Nathaniel commented that he'd heard of her unwavering dedication, which had become an inspiration to women across the continent. He said he'd been looking forward to meeting her. The way Nathaniel smiled at Leona was something Regan had never wished to witness for far too long. Shoving Leona aside, he stepped forward to introduce himself as well. The high priest praised him, saying he admired how his magical research had improved lives across the continent despite his young age. Regan casually accepted the praise and was about to respond when Leona snapped at him, telling him not to act arrogant in front of the high priest. Regan fired back instantly, pointing out that she had no right to lecture him on dignity after throwing punched at him. He called her an ignorant brute. Things escalated fast. Leona bristled. Regan asked what else he was supposed to call someone who drooled over a man's face, or would she prefer Airhead instead? Nathaniel hurried to intervene before the situation completely derailed. That was when a notification screen suddenly appeared in front of both of them. Endgame Shipper said, "OMG, I actually like the High Priest better. Can I switch ships?" Only Regan and Leona could see it. Nathaniel thankfully remained completely clueless. There was no doubt about it. This had to be the angels' doing. Grabbing Regan's arm, Leona quickly apologized to Nathaniel and dragged him out of the room. Several more notification screens popped up immediately, filled with bizarre usernames like Mini Fandom, Captain Trashbag, Pure Love Only, and Cavity King, all reacting enthusiastically to Regan and Leona holding hands, or what they called a romance baby step. Once they were alone, Regan observed that it seemed like these unknown beings were actively discussing them. Another message popped up from Ruler of the Night, who was instantly blocked for inappropriate content. Then, High Performance Juicer praised the stunning visuals of the two Central Division rookies, calling it entertaining to watch. Leona finally lost her patience and shouted for the angel to show herself. Regan doubted yelling would work, but the angel appeared anyway, floating nervously in midair. The angel admitted she had started something called dimensional streaming. After failing repeatedly, she'd asked for help, and hadn't expected such a massive audience. When Regan demanded an explanation, the angel clarified that she'd opened a dimensional channel, allowing celestials, or gods from other dimensions, to observe them. She added that the old system was boring, so she tweaked it. That was why the gods could now send messages directly. Then she proudly announced that these gods were officially supporting her. Regan groaned. Somehow, the situation had gotten even worse. It wasn't just one chaotic angel anymore. Now they had an audience of unhinged gods following their every move. The angel defended herself, saying she knew where to draw the line. Besides, she'd burned through 3 years' worth of divine power to launch the stream, so it wouldn't last long. Leona, surprisingly, seemed happy. She pointed out that some of them said she was cute, and honestly, they didn't seem that bad. Regan wondered if he was the only sane person left. Leona reasoned that it wasn't like these observers could actually do anything to them. Eventually, they returned to Nathaniel and apologized again. Nathaniel waved it off, explaining that he'd received a sudden revelation while praying. He already knew about their mission involving demonic beasts, and offered his help. A being mentioned only in ancient texts was alarming, but ignoring it would be far worse. Leona politely declined, saying they would handle it themselves. Internally, she was just relieved this plan didn't involve having a child with Regan. Nathaniel praised her resolve, calling her noble for throwing herself into danger for world peace. She brushed it off modestly. Regan added that Nathaniel should contact them if anything related to demonic beasts surfaced. The High Priest suddenly recalled something that might help and left to retrieve it. Regan frowned as he sat there, something Leona noticed but wisely chose not to ask about. Then the screen appeared again. Pure Love only said things are really frosty between them. The rookies must be struggling. East Not West asked, "Since we're here to help, shouldn't we do something?" High Performance Juicer agreed and said, "Let's start with something light." The gods' chat descended into complete chaos. Eventually, they decided to vote. The result? Stick their hands together, 443 votes. Stick their XXX together, 3 votes. Whatever the XXX meant, probably best not to know. A glowing light suddenly appeared, followed by another message announcing that divine will had been bestowed upon the world. Leona muttered about how weird these celestials were, but Regan only told her to sit instead. That was when Leona felt it. Something was about to happen. Before she could react, a divine beast suddenly dropped from above, landing squarely on her face. In the next instant, both she and Regan were flat on the floor. Nathaniel rushed over in alarm, asking if they were all right. Leona immediately gave a thumbs up, brushing it off like nothing happened. Then she and Regan locked eyes, both blushing, only to realize they were holding hands. The High Priest bowed so deeply he looked genuinely mortified by what had just happened. Both Leona and Regan sighed in unison, already exhausted, and asked the obvious question. Someone needed to explain this situation, preferably in very simple terms. The High Priest quickly introduced the culprit. The small creature was a divine beast named Luvi. Any 2 people it touched would end up stuck together for an entire day. He explained that while he'd gone to storage to fetch something for them, Luvi had suddenly appeared and, well, done this. He insisted that all of Sylphian's divine beasts were normally well-behaved, so he had no idea it would cause such chaos. Which meant Leona and Regan were stuck like this for the whole day, all thanks to the shipper gods. Both of them slowly turned to glare at the angel. She immediately panicked and claimed her divine power was already completely used up, so she had to leave now. She said this while sweating bullets, and very obviously lying. Then she disappeared on the spot. In their minds, every curse known to humanity was hurled in her direction, while they were still squeezing each other's hands. Once they left the temple and boarded a carriage, Regan immediately asked Leona to give him some space. Leona glared, asking where exactly he expected her to go in such a tiny carriage. Out the window? As she glanced outside, Leona suddenly froze and announced that she was getting off. Regan muttered that she really didn't understand jokes at all, calling her an idiot. Leona fired back by calling him a moron, then pointed straight ahead and told him to look. Up ahead, a man wielding a blazing sword stood surrounded by knights. Regan narrowed his eyes and recognized the situation instantly. An ether criminal. Ether was a special type of energy, completely different from normal magic. Those capable of wielding it were strictly managed by the state, since that power came with an equally high level of danger. Still, in every country, there were always criminals who abused it. Leona snapped at Regan to stop analyzing and get his lazy butt moving. People were in danger. She was about to jump out when Regan pulled her back by the arm. She glared at him coldly and demanded to know if he seriously planned to stay there because of his stupid pride. Were those people's lives worth less than his ego? She declared that she'd go out even if she had to cut off her own arm, and ordered him to move. Regan responded with a sigh and told her to watch closely. With a snap of his fingers, he cast frozen suffocation. In an instant, the criminal's body froze solid, locking him in place until he couldn't move at all. Smirking, Regan remarked that this was what people called a ranged takedown, on a completely different level from idiotic knights who couldn't even attack without charging in. That comment only annoyed Leona more. She really wanted to punch him. Unfortunately for her, they were still stuck holding hands. Otherwise, she would have happily demonstrated how dangerous it was to provoke a knight at close range. Then Leona sensed something else. She shouted for them to get down and slammed Regan onto the floor just in time, narrowly avoiding a magic bullet. Leona immediately realized the truth. The man on fire earlier had been a decoy. The real threat was a sniper. She wanted to chase the sniper before they could escape, but remembered she was still holding Regan's hand. With no time to waste, she pinned him down again, pulled out her gun, and fired. One shot. The culprit collapsed instantly. Everyone nearby noticed the weapon, and the sniper was arrested on the spot. Leona, still on top of Regan, casually aura farming and asked, "Who says I can't perform ranged attacks?" When everything finally settled, Leona groaned and said that thanks to someone, her first day had turned into a complete disaster. He replied that he felt the same. Then, she casually asked if he wasn't hungry, only for him to quickly say that he wasn't. She argued that they had missed both lunch and dinner that day. Regan shut that down instantly. It was only one day. She could endure it. Looking at their filthy clothes, Leona pointed out that even changing like this would be difficult for both of them. Regan suggested that she cut one sleeve first, and that he could fix it later with restoration magic if she wanted to remove her shirt. He didn't want to stay in dirty clothes either. She muttered that there would be no holding back, and began unbuttoning her shirt, which immediately made Regan avert his gaze, his face heating up. Using one hand turned out to be harder than expected, and Leona made a few strange noises as she struggled. Regan stiffened instantly and told her not to make it weird. She was just changing clothes. She muttered that the underwear part was the worst. It wouldn't come off. That did it. Regan literally sprang up from his seat like he was being launched. His innocent ears had been corrupted in an instant. He demanded how she could say something like that in front of a guy. She asked why she wasn't even allowed to talk freely now. It wasn't like she had shown him anything, but he insisted that kind of talk was improper. Curious, Leona asked why he was acting like he was seeing her as a woman. After all, she only saw him as a dumb mage, not even as a man. The thought briefly crossed her mind. Was he a virgin? But she dismissed it just as quickly. With Regan's face, there was no way that could be true. Meanwhile, Regan was internally losing his composure. Being alone in a room with a woman who wasn't his nanny was a first for him, and she didn't seem to understand just how reckless she was. Even earlier, when she had casually sat on top of him, right on that hard part. Of course, he forced himself to stop thinking about it and pull himself together. He needed to focus on repaying his debt to that idiot for saving her from the demonic bullet. Looking at him, she asked if he was trying to start another fight and told him he'd better drop it. He awkwardly asked if he had said something to upset her, or if there was anything she wanted since she had helped him earlier. He said he'd repay her so they could call it even. She could even pick something expensive, like jewelry, since girls usually liked shiny things. She asked how the conversation had suddenly turned into money. Still, if she had to name something, she quickly requested an absurdly rare item, the newly released SSS rank product, Roar of the Otherworldly Black Dragon. When he looked confused, she told him to forget it if he didn't know. She'd just send the bill to the Clanford family. Regan agreed and told her to do whatever she wanted. Once they had both finished changing, they glanced at each other. Leona asked what he was wearing. Did he think he was some kind of actor in a theater troupe? Regan shot back that she looked like a beggar. She countered that even royalty wouldn't dress like him. Irritated, he asked if she always slept in filthy clothes. Leona corrected him. They were training clothes, because she had to do her nightly exercises. As for mages like him, Regan said he needed plenty of rest to properly calculate magic formulas. But that night, sleep wasn't even an option for Regan. There was no way he could get any rest like this, while Leona was swinging her sword with her free hand and training non-stop. She told him to endure it, because she still needed to sharpen her skills to save the world. Training didn't stop just because the day had gone completely off the rails. So he gave up arguing. Fine. If sleeping was impossible, he'd just read a book and wait it out. Except, that didn't work either. Without realizing it, he found himself looking at her. This was probably the first time he had ever watched her train. Leona was completely locked in, so focused that it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist, him included. Her footwork was solid and clean, each step controlled. Her stance never wavered, and every swing of her sword followed a precise line. When she focused, that red ether, so similar to her hair, gathered around her as if responding to her will. Regan caught himself thinking she looked beautiful. The thought hit him so hard that he smacked himself in the face with his book as a wake-up call. Leona stopped and teasingly asked why he was hitting himself. Regan stiffly blamed a mosquito. She looked unconvinced and asked if he was bored, suggesting they head back to his room. Just then, another voice cut in. He commented on his room and asked, very pointedly, whether his eyes were playing tricks on him or if the two of them were really holding hands. Regan immediately noticed that the gaze directed at him was anything but friendly. Leona lit up at once and happily greeted the newcomer as her senior. Nathan smiled widely and slung an arm around her neck like they were old pals, saying it felt unreal to be welcomed back by Leona after his mission. Regan watched the exchange, instantly suspicious. Who was this guy? Nathan noticed him right away and casually asked who the man holding Leona's hand was. He even said that maybe she had gotten a boyfriend without telling him. Leona elbowed Nathan in the chest, saying that wasn't funny at all, and introduced Regan as a fellow rookie and mage, while Nathan Starlight was her senior from the Department of Knighthood. Nathan's next question was why they were still holding hands. So, she explained that there had been an incident during a mission, and that they were stuck like this for the day. Her senior then offered, completely straight-faced, to cut Regan's arm off for her, which earned him another whack. Leona laughed and said he'd gotten better at joking. Eventually they parted as Leona cheerfully waved Nathan goodbye. As they walked away, she told Regan not to mind him too much. Nathan was a bit goofy, but not a bad person. Regan couldn't help but wonder just how dense Leona was. Once they reached the training grounds, Leona said she'd keep practicing there and told Regan to just stand around. He agreed, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Nathan, who was clearly not acting friendly toward Leona just because she was his junior. In fact, Nathan had been glaring at him like a rival male guarding his territory. Even Regan had to admit Nathan was good-looking and capable, So why would someone like him be interested in a woman like Leona? A woman who was basically a gorilla. Maybe there was some hidden appeal he just wasn't seeing. Objectively speaking, Leona's looks weren't bad, though obviously not better than his. Red hair was rare in the Empire. She had a high forehead, straight eyebrows, ruby red eyes, a sharp nose, soft cheeks, and fair skin. Even the way her red hair clung to the nape of her pale neck, paired with her faint, sweet scent. He slapped his forehead. He had practically been drooling over the very woman he'd just called a gorilla. Desperate to deny it, he blamed his feelings on divine interference. Obviously, this had to be the angel's doing. Some kind of enchanted prank to mess with his head. Regan suddenly shouted, asking if the angel and the gods were pulling weird tricks again. Nothing happened, and the angel didn't appear. Which meant everything he'd just felt came from him. He was officially losing his mind. A few minutes later, Leona finally sheathed her sword and told him they were done for the night. It was time to head back. She tapped his back with her hand. Blushing, Regan quickly warned her not to touch him. He claimed he might be suffering from hypersensitive magic sensory syndrome and asked her not to make physical contact without permission. She stared at him in confusion and muttered about what was wrong with him now. Then she pointed out the obvious problem. She was drenched in sweat and asked if she could take a shower. Regan immediately asked if she was crazy. She said she'd just lean into the bathroom doorway and wash herself. He shut that down instantly, saying anyone's shower was off limits and telling her not to argue. Leona asked if he seriously expected her to go to bed soaked in sweat. His imagination immediately ran wild again at the word sweat, and he got a nosebleed on the spot. Finally, he told her to just cut off his arm. In the end, Leona managed to clean herself using a magical cleaning tool. And that same night, Regan silently vowed to invent a spell that would allow people to shower without taking off their clothes at all. Inside his room, the two of them sat there feeling refreshed. When Leona asked if he wasn't planning to sleep at all, Regan firmly said he wouldn't die from missing one night of sleep. After reminding him of his own words about how mages were supposed to need proper rest, she casually mentioned that his eyes were a really deep blue. That comment caught him off guard for a moment. Eventually, he asked if she was only noticing now. Confused, Leona said it wasn't like she'd ever looked closely at his eyes before. She'd always assumed they were green, or maybe light blue. Regan teased her in return, saying her eyes looked a bit strange too, and that she might want to see an eye doctor someday. And then his thoughts betrayed him. He realized he did remember her blood-red eye color. It was unusual, one of those things that stuck in his mind whether he wanted it to or not. Then he heard a soft sound. At first, he thought he'd imagined it. But no, Leona had fallen asleep while sitting right beside him. Regan stared at her, irritated. It was the middle of the night. She was alone in a room with him. Someone who could use powerful magic and was considered devastatingly handsome. And she was sleeping like nothing in the world could go wrong. But the real issue hit him next. Would he really be fine staying awake the entire night? The next day gave him no time to overthink it. The two of them were now standing in front of their commander, who witnessed their unbreakable hand-holding firsthand. In the end, Miles decided to call Leona back once the effect wore off. Leona asked if the reason for summoning her was something Regan wasn't supposed to hear. The commander explained it wasn't exactly a secret, but it could be a personal matter for her. A new recruit was joining the Central Division, someone she had known since childhood, freshly graduated as the top student from the Spirit Academy. Leona frowned and immediately cut him off, saying she didn't have any friends like that. Regan, listening quietly, connected the dots in his head. Spirit summoning and necromancy usually came from noble bloodlines. And judging by the commander's careful tone, this wasn't some distant branch family. Whoever this person was, he came from a high-ranking household. That was why the commander wanted Leona's opinion first. He even offered to transfer her to another branch if she wanted. Leona thanked him, but said she didn't care whether the guy joined or not. If anything, she pointed out that transferring him instead of her would be more reasonable for fair treatment. Miles accepted her decision and moved on to the important news. The ether criminals captured yesterday had no memory of committing their crimes. Their memories cut off while they were on Garel Island. On top of that, a mine worker had gone missing there just the night before. Because of the previous incident, the case had been handed directly to special forces instead of the local precinct. A portal would be prepared as soon as they were ready. Their first destination would be Mivatos City, the closest point to Garel Island. As they were sent off, a female staff member awkwardly remarked that the two of them seemed to be getting along well. Both of them denied it at the exact same time, without missing a beat, of course. Once they reached Mivatos City, Leona's attention immediately drifted to the important things, like food. She was already looking forward to eating seafood. Regan reminded her they weren't there to eat. They were on a mission and should check the ferry schedule first. That resolve lasted about 5 seconds. The streets were packed with vendors, the smell of seafood hanging thick in the air. Leona was ready to pounce on everything she saw, when Regan tried to yank her back and reminded her about the mission again. Leona argued that her hunger had already hit its limit. One woman suggested that Regan should treat his girlfriend to lunch since their place offered a couple's set. Regan immediately denied that Leona was his girlfriend, then walked away while practically dragging her along. After confirming the ferry schedule, Leona protested that they still had an hour before the next ferry and suggested they at least eat something. Regan sighed and told her to wait 10 seconds. Exactly 10 seconds later, their hands separated. Leona stared at him, impressed. Regan had actually been counting down, and his timing was perfect. He said that level of precision was normal for him. On the spot, Leona thought this was exactly why mages like him were so insufferable. But since they were already there, she declared they might as well eat, and pointed out the couple's set the woman had offered earlier. Regan refused, but suggested they eat separately and meet back at the dock in an hour. Just because they'd been stuck together due to a Celestial's prank didn't mean anything had changed or that they were suddenly close. Annoyed, Leona told him he had zero tact, but he didn't care and just move on. If Regan thought she wouldn't be able to eat the couple's set, he was dead wrong. She ordered it anyway, and ate the entire thing by herself, leaving her completely stuffed and satisfied. As she walked, a little girl called out to Leona and handed her a small charm, saying it was exactly what she needed. It was a protection charm. The girl explained that her grandma had made the pouch, and she'd picked the flower petals inside herself. Her grandma was an amazing psychic, and had told her to make sure the charm went to a lady with red hair. She added that wearing it would protect Leona from dangerous men. When Leona asked if she even knew what that meant, the girl happily admitted she didn't. She was just repeating what her grandma had said. Half amused and half touched, Leona asked if she could buy all the charms instead. Even if it was just for peace of mind, it couldn't hurt. And anything that might protect her chastity from those weird gods sounded like a good deal. However, the girl refused, saying her grandma had told her to give Leona only one. Leona accepted that, then mentioned she knew someone else in a similar situation. She told the girl to wait there and turned around, already planning to drag Regan over so he could buy a charm too. Soon enough, Leona scanned the area, but Regan was nowhere to be found. Then she heard women screaming about a handsome man who looked like an actor. They'd never seen someone that charming in their town before, and now they were all eager to find out who he was. Of course, Leona already knew exactly who it was. She marched straight over, grabbed Regan, and told him they were leaving immediately because they didn't have time to linger. Regan, completely confused, asked if she'd found some kind of clue. She quickly said no, then admitted this was about protecting their chastity. But when they reached the spot where Leona had seen the little girl, there was no one there. Leona ignored his protests about being dragged there without checking first, and asked a nearby woman if she'd seen a child selling talismans in the area. The woman shook her head and said no one had been there all day, and that the stall had been empty ever since the old woman who used to own it passed away. So, had Leona just encountered a ghost earlier? Cut to the scene where both Leona and Regan were riding a ship. Leona looked around in awe at the beautiful scenery and wondered out loud if it was even possible to transport all of this with a ship that size. Regan sighed and commented that it was obvious she hadn't paid attention in geography class. Of course, she was the type who slept through lectures. Garel Island only had around 50 residents, all of whom worked in the mining industry. These days they used magical devices, so the type of ship didn't really matter, and since the island produced a special kind of mineral, It was still profitable even if the annual yield was low. Leona still didn't understand why the Demon King would unleash monsters on a tiny mine like that. On top of that, the statue of Sylphian on the island had been stained. Regan advised her not to jump to conclusions and said they should figure things out after investigating. As Leona turned her gaze back to the vast sea, Regan found himself staring at her instead, momentarily caught by her beauty. Of course, he quickly looked away, hiding his blush. Suddenly, shouts erupted across the ship about stowaways who hadn't paid their fare. One man was being dragged along, begging not to be sent to Garrel Island. Another clung to Leona's leg, screaming that the island was basically hell and pleading not to be sent back, along with his companion. Both Regan and Leona tried to calm the man down and asked what had really happened on the island. With a trembling voice, the man explained that Garrel Island was now overrun with monsters and that most of the residents had already been slaughtered. He and his friend Jake had tried to escape, but Jake was attacked and badly injured. They barely managed to board the ship, and with Jake injured and himself completely exhausted, he fainted after boarding. When he woke up, they were already heading straight back to the island. Regan's expression hardened. If most of the residents were gone, handling this with just the two of them might be too much. He suggested turning back and calling for reinforcements. Leona immediately disagreed. There could still be survivors. Saving them came first. Reinforcements could deal with whatever remained afterward. Regan pushed back, asking what would happen if both of them got hurt. Could she take responsibility for that? But she snapped at him for being so negative. That was when they noticed the eyes on them. People were watching what looked like a full-blown lovers' quarrel. Turning back to the desperate man, Leona told him not to worry. They would do whatever they could. But suddenly she noticed the man lying on the floor was smiling, while quietly forming a spell in his hand. Regan reacted instantly, throwing up a shield in front of Leona. Now both men began acting unnaturally in sync, their expressions twisted as if possessed by something evil. Then the angel appeared, shouting that those creatures were the Demon King's minions. She explained that a demonic beast's behavior changed depending on the emotion it fed on. To defeat one, they had to identify that emotion, cut it off, and slowly starve the beast. Demonic beasts fed on human negative emotions, and the stronger the emotion, the stronger the beast became. The problem was that the angel was only an avatar who had awakened 3 years ago, so this was her first time dealing with demonic beasts. Regan advised Leona to stay calm and suppress her emotions while they handled the situation. The two monsters continued provoking them, saying that neither Leona nor Regan was anything special. Unfortunately, Leona's temper flared again, prompting the angel to scramble to calm her down. The demonic beasts proudly declared that they didn't deal in simple emotions like anger. They were the Demon King's elite minions, feeding on humanity's most debased feelings. They announced themselves as demonic beasts of shame. That somehow did stop the protagonists. Honest as ever, Leona even commented that a beast of wrath would have sounded more fitting than a beast of shame. That comment finally pissed the monsters off. In response, they summoned a massive wave and hurled it straight at Leona and Regan. After shouting for everyone to run away, Leona braced herself, expecting to be soaked. But nothing happened. She was completely dry. Other gods, like the scene-crafting artisan and the degenerate power warrior, were not pleased that her soaking scene had been skipped. One even commented that the monster clearly wasn't on their side. When Leona checked on Regan, he was completely drenched. Naturally, gods like scene-crafting artisan and spinny spin spin were very satisfied with this development. Leona burst out laughing and joked that Regan should have done more strength training. Regan, now the only soaked person, turned even redder. Unfortunately, the demonic beasts fed on his embarrassment and launched another wave attack. This time, Regan desperately tried to block it while complaining why he was the only one being targeted, while Leona remained untouched. She yelled at him to stop feeling embarrassed, since it was only making the monsters stronger. Eventually, Regan was overwhelmed and took a direct hit to the chest. At that time, even Leona started wondering why the attacks weren't affecting her at all, until she remembered the little girl's words about the charm protecting her from dangerous men. She looked down at the protection charm in her hand. The moment the demonic beasts sensed it, they hissed and recoiled, complaining about the scent of the flowers and demanding she stay away. That confirmed it. The charm was working. The beasts attacked again, but Leona confidently stepped forward, declaring it useless as long as she had the charm. Unfortunately, she forgot that Regan was standing right behind her. Poor guy took yet another hit and was sent floating into the air. Seeing that he didn't even have the strength to cast a levitation spell, Leona leapt up and caught him. For a brief moment, Regan's mind went blank until he saw his own blushing reflection in Leona's eye. He looked like a damsel in distress being rescued, and that realization made him furious. So when they landed, Regan coldly said to let go of him, looking like he was ready to kill someone. He unleashed every attack spell he had, intent on pouring all his humiliation and rage into the demonic beasts. But Leona stopped him, saying that his attacks alone wouldn't work. The plan was simple. With the charm protecting her, Leona would take the lead with her sword, while Regan provided support. She didn't hesitate. She charged in, shouting that this was actually satisfying, while exchanging blows at the monster. The angel, watching everything unfold, clapped excitedly and commented on how cool Leona looked. Suddenly, message screens from the gods began appearing again. Degenerate Power Warrior commented that all he was seeing was fighting. Pure Love only agreed and said she had come for romance, not this. Spinny Spin Spin suggested they do something before the demonic beasts were sealed. High Performance Juicer chimed in, proposing that since they were on an island, they should just destroy the ship. In the end, the romance-crazed gods voted unanimously, 455 votes, to strand them. Then the will of the gods descended. One of the demonic beast's eyes suddenly glowed, and in the blink of an eye, massive waves clashed as a violent explosion tore through the ship. The result was obvious. Both of them eventually found themselves lying on the island shore. Leona was the first to stir. She frowned, trying to figure out where she was, when an old man approached, relieved to see that they were finally awake. He explained that he had been helping move injured people who had washed ashore and introduced himself as the chief of Garrel Island. Apparently, the island's ship had been stolen recently, and for some reason, fragments of it had washed ashore along with several people. He added that they had managed to contact the main island, and that things were slowly stabilizing again. Leona and Regan exchanged looks, so the demonic beasts really had been taken care of. When the old man asked if they knew what had happened, Leona explained that ether criminals had boarded the ship and attacked them, carefully leaving out the part about demonic beasts. The chief believed her and assumed the criminals were the cause of all the chaos. Still, he was relieved that everyone had survived. Leona decided it was best to let him keep believing that. Then came the bad news. There was no ship available to take them back yet. One had been requested, but it wouldn't arrive until the next day. And since the inn was full of injured people, the two of them would have to share a room. Both of them froze internally. So this was the strand them together plan the gods cooked up. Leona immediately cursed the gods again. Scene-crafting artisan proudly commented that it was a timeless trope in every dimension, while another god joked that it was a shame the ship had conveniently stopped running. Since there was no way out of it, Leona quickly assessed the situation. Regan was obviously exhausted, but so was she, and she wanted a soft bed just as badly. For a brief moment, she considered settling it with arm wrestling, then downgraded the idea to rock, paper, scissors while shooting Regan a challenging glare. Regan, meanwhile, could tell she was already plotting to claim the room. Still, after everything she'd done that day, he decided he could survive sleeping outside for one night. More importantly, he didn't want to reveal yet another embarrassing side of himself. That was when Leona suddenly asked if he could swim. Regan immediately sensed danger, and sure enough, she suggested they just swim back to the main island. If he didn't like it, he could stay behind alone. She even warned him that staying overnight together on a tiny island might lead to who knows what. Before he could respond, Leona dove straight into the water. Then, she waved at him cheerfully and said that if he couldn't swim, he could sleep there and leave tomorrow. Regan panicked and shouted for her to at least cast a temperature-regulating spell if she was serious, then hurriedly cast one himself. Degenerate Power Warrior was completely amazed. He'd never seen anyone choose a 2-hour swim just to escape a forced romance setup. Another god jokingly asked if they could wish for a scene where the two blushed after catching glimpses of each other through soaked clothes. But another god immediately shut that down, saying it was asking too much from those two. In the water, both of them fought for endurance, and to protect their own chastity once again, while the angel teared up and apologized to them. They eventually made it back, but by then, it was already night. Both of them complained non-stop, saying they felt like they might collapse any second. Leona still couldn't believe Regan had actually followed her, and when she finally looked at him properly, she realized something unexpected. He was more muscular than she'd thought. Regan caught her staring and immediately asked what she was looking at, adding that they should go to their separate rooms. Leona flustered instantly, denying everything, and insisting she was leaving anyway. She turned to go, only to notice Angel following her. Leona asked if Angel wasn't leaving too, and the angel replied that she was. Then Leona noticed what Angel was holding. Angel explained that when demonic beasts lose their power and get sealed, they revert to their original stone form. She had retrieved it earlier from the sea. Leona nodded but pointed out that Angel looked like she wanted to say something else. Angel bowed deeply and thanked both of them for defeating the demonic beast that day. Leona brushed it off cheerfully, saying it was nothing and reminding Angel that she'd promised they were going to save the world. That was exactly why Angel looked even more embarrassed. She admitted it was also the reason she was excited about the idea of amazing people like them having a child. Then she quickly turned away, muttering that she needed to go gather divine power, because it apparently took an absurd amount of it just to bring two people together. Leona stared at her, completely confused. When she looked down, she realized there was something in her hand, high-grade holy water. She laughed softly, realizing it must have come from Angel. Turns out the cute Angel really did feel bad for dragging Leona and Regan into that mess, and this was her awkward way of apologizing. The next day greeted Leona with perfect weather and a rare sense of peace. She felt refreshed enough to take a casual walk around the dorm, enjoying the quiet, right up until fate ruined it on schedule. A familiar voice called her name. It was the blonde man who had also been transferred, standing there like he'd planned this moment down to the second. He said he knew waiting would pay off since Leona always woke up early. Leona didn't bother easing into it. She asked what he wanted and warned him she'd leave if he didn't have something important to say. He replied that he simply wanted to see her because he missed her. That answer annoyed her more than anything else, and she dismissed it as pure nonsense. Then he made the mistake of commenting that she should be more polite since she was a woman. That was it. Leona immediately launched into an exaggerated apology, so thick with sarcasm it could have cracked stone. She declared that she had committed a grave sin. How dare a woman like her speak freely, especially before the most esteemed first imperial prince, Isaiah? The prince tried to backtrack, saying that wasn't what he meant. He asked if she was still angry. Was it because he was a prince? Was that why she was acting this way? Leona sighed. She'd already explained this once, but since he insisted, she laid it out again, slow and unmistakable. Yes, she had been shocked to learn that her childhood friend, the boy she thought was a commoner, turned out to be royalty. But prince or street orphan, it made no difference to her. What she couldn't stand was being looked at by the Empress as nothing more than a future baby-making tool. Thinking back on it, she realized she'd been incredibly restrained. Breaking a few windows suddenly felt merciful. She really should have caused a much bigger scene. The prince said he only wanted her by his side. That line snapped the last thread of her patience. She shouted at him to stop acting like her lover, because she hated it. Before he could say anything else, she turned away, done with the conversation. She slammed the door behind her and let out a heavy sigh, muttering that talking was cheap and meant nothing. That was when she noticed Regan. He was standing right in front of her, literally. Startled, Leona demanded to know if he'd been eavesdropping. Regan calmly pointed out that having a loud lover's quarrel right at the entrance didn't exactly count as eavesdropping. She instantly denied it was a lover's quarrel and snapped at him to leave her alone as she walked past him. Regan followed up by asking if she had any kind of relationship with the prince. That only poured fuel on the fire. Leona denied it immediately and made it very clear that even if there were something, which there wasn't, it was none of Regan's business. Then he dropped a warning. He said the prince was a no-go because he was a dangerous man. Leona didn't buy it. She knew she'd been cold to Isaiah, but he wasn't a bad person. As kids, he'd followed her around with watery eyes, and she'd always been the one protecting him. On top of that, the prince was known for being loved by the people of the empire. Regan disagreed without hesitation. He said the prince had simply put on a convincing act in front of her. The truth was that both the prince and his father were far more scheming than she realized. That, according to him, was why she'd been able to live so carefree. Hearing Regan casually refer to the emperor as the prince's father made Leona seriously question his sanity. Regan didn't back down. He said the truly insane one was the prince, a man who would do anything to get what he wanted, just to possess it. Leona glared at him and doubted there was anyone in the empire with a personality as foul as Regan's. She told him to stay out of it since it had nothing to do with him and walked away. Regan let out a frustrated sigh. He'd warned her, and she hadn't listened. She didn't even realize she was walking straight into a trap. But what irritated him more than that was the feeling gnawing at him ever since he'd seen the two of them together. A tight, unpleasant sensation that refused to go away, no matter how much he tried to ignore it. After that whole mess, Leona ended up helping a woman. While carrying half the stack like it weighed nothing, Leona casually asked if the so-called freshman welcome party was real or just another scare tactic cooked up by bored seniors. Unfortunately, it was very real, and calling it a welcome was generous at best. The woman explained that it was closer to hazing with a fancy name. Impossible tasks, brutal training, mental stress, the full package. Enough to make people question their career choices by lunchtime. Still, she added there was a reason behind all the suffering. That reason turned out to be pairing. The whole ordeal existed to push recruits into forming duos with juniors they clicked with. Leona immediately thought about herself and Regan. They were already paired, and not even with a senior. Lowering her voice, the woman added that the central branch was especially strange this year. Talented, yes. Stable? Not so much. Leona thanked her for the warning and silently agreed. A place full of geniuses was bound to attract a matching number of lunatics. There were 5 new recruits this year, including herself, the prince, and Regan. That meant 2 more unfamiliar faces would show up at the party. Leona wasn't worried. If anyone tried to look down on her, she planned to shut that down with skill alone. Simple and clean. The day of the welcome party arrived, and the moment Leona stepped into the grand auditorium, she realized calling it an auditorium was a lie. It was basically a stadium. Since things hadn't officially started yet, she decided to scout the competition. One guy immediately caught her attention. Close combat type, solid build, interesting stance. Fighting him might actually be fun. So she approached him. That was a mistake. The man reacted like she was a walking curse. Every time she moved closer, he dodged away. When she finally said it was fine and turned as if to back off, she reappeared right in front of him a split second later, fast enough to look like teleportation. The poor guy completely lost it. He yelped about a woman being there and begged her to stay away, scrambling back like a frightened puppy convinced it was about to be eaten. Elsewhere, Angel popped up beside Regan, visibly stressed. She whispered that a rival had appeared and asked what they should do if Leona ended up liking that guy. Regan replied through telepathy that it sounded more like the Angel's type. Angel immediately denied it, flustered, claiming she just thought the man's muscles were impressive, which, according to her, was a perfectly normal observation. When Regan said he didn't care either way, Angel sighed dramatically and said it was sad he couldn't appreciate the beauty of muscles. Then she decided this was an emergency and summoned the gods. Naturally, the gods were instantly distracted. One commented that the place was overflowing with good-looking people. Another pointed at the beastmen and wondered if a beefy alpha wolf wasn't a bit much. Someone else admired the ears and tail and suggested creating a beast-human race in their own dimension. Angel yelled at them for losing focus and reminded them that their job was supporting the Regan-Leona pairing, not running a beauty pageant. Meanwhile, Regan watched the beastmen still fleeing from Leona and thought that someone like that wouldn't have been chosen without serious skill. Angel noticed his look and encouraged him, saying that knowing both yourself and your enemy was the key to victory. In other words, go gather intel. Regan didn't care until he saw the gods' comments. One suggested going big with divine interference. Another joked that since a wolf human showed up, maybe Regan should get cat ears. Absolutely not. Determined to prevent that future, Regan stepped in and told Leona to stop chasing the guy. She said she was just trying to say hello since it was their first meeting, nothing more. Regan pointed out that the man looked traumatized and suggested leaving it for later. He then walked straight to the shaken beastman, fully aware that the gods were counting down to give him cat ears if he hesitated. He asked if the man was okay. The beastman grabbed his hands like a survivor clinging to wreckage and thanked him profusely, introducing himself as Cillian. Some god immediately commented that this was a beautiful moment about casting aside prejudice. Another noted the strong BL potential. Angel groaned and said that was absolutely not the pairing she was aiming for. Right on cue, Nathan arrived and officially welcomed the 150th class recruits. He told them these were the people they'd be struggling alongside from now on, and to remember each other's faces well. Leona quickly took stock. Regan, the ever-annoying constant. A beast man who now looked at her like she was a walking disaster. The prince, wearing his usual gloomy expression. And lastly, a man so pretty he could easily pass as a girl. Nathan then explained that by the end of the welcome party, seniors would choose partners for each recruit. He added, with a pointed look at Regan, that some pairings were already decided, and that everyone should be careful not to get hurt. Anyone seriously injured would be disqualified from the pairing. Regan couldn't help thinking that Nathan sounded way too hopeful about that part. With that ominous note, the welcome party officially began. Soon enough, all of them were lined up in front of the dungeon, where Nathan proudly announced that this lovely hole in the ground was the official venue for welcoming the new recruits. Nothing said welcome, like being thrown into a monster-infested ruin. To make things extra thoughtful, the seniors had prepared special gifts in the form of surveillance drones. They would be watching everything, very closely. And for anyone who got scared, there was a white flag provided. All they had to do was wave it. The only issue was the writing on it. The Central Branch's biggest coward. So yes, surrender was available, but dignity was not. As for rewards, Nathan explained that the rookie who defeated the boss monster the fastest would become president of the 150th class. When Leona asked what that actually meant, he happily listed the perks: priority on vacation requests, first pick of missions, and, most importantly, the right to boss everyone else around for an entire month. That was all Leona needed to hear. There was no universe where she let someone else grab that position. Then a god wondered out loud if this meant yet another combat arc. Scene-crafting artisan dramatically complained that for a romance channel, there were far too many fight scenes. As usual, instead of arguing, the gods decided to trust chaos and spun the wheel. Everyone watched with full confidence in the questionable power of randomness. The arrow stopped at pheromones. Leona and Regan both gasped. In front of them was a list of horrifying possibilities they'd narrowly avoided: age regression, gender swap, body swap, cat ears, locked room. And now this. Of course it landed on pheromones. Whatever that meant, one thing was obvious. This could not happen in public. Without even discussing it, the two of them bolted toward the dungeon. Warnings about entering one at a time were completely ignored. Leona grabbed Regan's wrist and dragged him along, forcing them both inside at once. If disaster was coming, they'd deal with it away from an audience. Inside the dungeon, Leona still hadn't let go of Regan's wrist. Not even a little. Regan had already reached the stage where he was done pretending this was fine. He told her to release him, but she waved it off like it was a non-issue. If they got separated, things would get messy, so this was simply the safest option. Regan didn't push it. He didn't like it, but since no cat ears had suddenly appeared on his head, he decided to take the win and move on. As they went deeper, the two of them quietly realized something important. None of the bizarre effects from the spinning wheel seemed to be active. No body swaps, no weird transformations, nothing. Regan still pointed out that this didn't mean they were safe, and staying alert was non-negotiable. Leona, however, abruptly announced that they should just find the boss and beat it up already. Straight to the point, exactly how she liked things. Regan followed, but something had been bothering him for a while. The air carried a strong rose scent, thick enough to mess with his head. His first thought was that some monster was probably using it to lure prey, which felt deeply unpleasant to think about. Outside, Nathan was growing restless. The boss still hadn't appeared, and he didn't like the delay. The observers tried to calm him down, reminding him that the recruits weren't helpless kids. One of them even pointed out that Leona, especially, knew how to escape if things went wrong. The monsters inside were only C rank, and the boss, a giant vampire bat, was B rank at best. Nathan still wasn't satisfied. Everything about this setup had been prepared with Leona in mind, and now she was inside with Regan of all people. That part annoyed him the most. In the end, he ordered more drones to be deployed. Back in the dungeon, things escalated without warning. A monster lunged from Regan's blind spot, and Leona reacted instantly. She shielded him and cut the creature down in one clean motion. Then, she casually noted that the monsters felt too big for C rank and checked if he was hurt. Regan said that he was fine and told her to stop talking to him. Even so, it was hard to ignore that something had been off about him for a while now. Leona noticed it too. She asked again if he was sure he didn't need to rest, then paused mid-thought. There was a new scent in the air, fresh, clean, like a forest, with a faint fruity note. Curious, Leona asked if he smelled anything strange too. When she described the forest-like scent, Regan stiffened. What he was smelling wasn't fresh at all. It was the same overwhelming rose scent, strong enough to make his head spin. The realization hit both of them at once. This wasn't natural, and it definitely wasn't random. The crazy gods were involved again. Before either of them could react, a woman appeared. She was a strikingly beautiful vampire who calmly stated that Leona and Regan were the ones her lord had been talking about. Angel nearly short-circuited on the spot. A vampire like this had no reason to be here, and the energy coming off her was deeply demonic. The vampire, meanwhile, recognized Angel and casually wondered why she was awake when she was supposed to be sleeping forever. Angel quickly explained the situation to her companions. Vampires could shapeshift, control animals, and often use beauty as a weapon. They used to be neutral as a clan, but this one was different. The demonic energy was unmistakable. She had defected to the Demon King's side. Worse, she wasn't just any vampire. She was a vampire queen. The vampire queen claimed she was only there to take the two of them back. She also made no attempt to hide her interest in Regan, openly admiring his face like she'd already decided he belonged to her. Regan, oddly enough, felt relieved. Ignoring her entirely, he just thought that at least the scent finally made sense. For a moment, he'd worried this was another prank by the gods with questionable hobbies. Leona, now fully done with this situation, said that since they knew where the scent was coming from, they should just take the vampire down. She even warned Regan that if he thought he might get charmed, he should stay back. The vampire queen took that personally. Furious, she declared that no man survived a direct hit from her charm. Her plan was simple: break Regan first, then use him to capture Leona. She unleashed her spell, commanding Regan to kneel as her slave. Instead of collapsing, both of them recoiled at the same time and complained about how she smelled like a sewer. Yeah, so much for an unstoppable charm spell. A few minutes later, the fight was over. The vampire queen was captured with embarrassing ease, tied up, and forced to walk ahead of them while leading the way to the boundary stone. There were only two ways out of a dungeon. Either you defeated the boss and let the whole place collapse, or you smashed the boundary stone and escaped before it decided to take you down with it. As they kept moving, Leona felt heat spreading through her body. It was uncomfortable, but manageable. Regan, on the other hand, was very much not okay. Leona stopped pretending and demanded answers. That scent everyone felt. This wasn't the vampire's trick, was it? The vampire queen, still tied up and furious, immediately denied it. She was offended that they accused her of producing something that smelled like sewage. Even restrained, her pride was doing most of the fighting. And more importantly, she was right. The scent didn't fade after she was captured. Even Angel didn't know what was causing it. That narrowed things down fast. So it must be them. She silently cursed the Celestials. She hated backing off, but this wasn't something she could cut her way through. A moment later, Regan quietly whispered a prayer to the Great Spirit, asking for guidance and salvation. That alone made Leona turn sharply toward him. She checked on him again, concern slipping into her voice, but he brushed it off and even yanked his arm away like he'd been burned. The truth was, Regan was barely holding it together. Looking at Leona, his thoughts went completely off the rails. All he could think about was sinking his teeth into her neck and breathing in that sweet scent until his head cleared. The idea alone scared him enough that he slapped his own face just to stay grounded. Why did things like this only ever happen to him? But she was fine. He was losing a war inside his own head. Then chaos decided it wasn't done yet. A massive snake burst into view, and Leona reacted instantly, tackling Regan to the ground so the attack flew over them. The save worked. The position did not. She ended up sitting squarely on him, and unfortunately, her timing could not have been worse. Regan shoved her away immediately, mortified and fighting for his life on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, the vampire queen suddenly dropped to her knees, her attitude flipping completely. She declared that her lord had come to save her. A silver-haired man appeared, calm and overwhelming. He introduced himself as the Vampire King and apologized for his subordinate's behavior, speaking as if this whole disaster was just a mild inconvenience. Apparently, she was supposed to escort them politely. Angel went on full alert. The demonic pressure coming off him was no joke, and she immediately suspected ties to the Demon King's army. The Vampire King dodged the question with ease. He mentioned hearing about a bothersome fly buzzing around the humans who defeated demon beasts, and casually addressed Angel as Sylphian. When she pushed for answers, he laughed and said it was too early for that conversation. Instead, he decided to leave a friend behind to play with them, introducing a demonic beast of jealousy called Naga. He mentioned Naga had been restless all day, but after seeing Regan, it finally made sense. Apparently, Regan himself hadn't realized what he was feeling yet. With that unsettling comment, the Vampire King vanished. Naga did not waste time. It opened its massive jaws, clearly intending to eat both of them. Leona assessed the situation in seconds. Regan wasn't in fighting shape, and they wouldn't win head-on. She made the call. He was to shatter the boundary stone while she distracted the monster. Regan hated every part of that plan, but he knew she was right. After what felt like an eternity, they finally burst out of the dungeon. Nathan rushed to them immediately, checking Leona for injuries before spinning on Regan and demanding an explanation. Regan told them the vampire clan had appeared, which sent shockwaves through the seniors. The vampire clan was supposed to be long gone. Hostile vampires showing up now made no sense at all, but questions would have to wait. Nathan ordered both Leona and Regan to be transferred back to the temple immediately, and commanded the remaining 3 rookies still inside the dungeon to retreat. Whatever this was, it was far bigger than a welcome party. Leona and Regan were still reeling from the aftermath of the dungeon chaos, only now things had taken a very peculiar turn. A priest explained the situation with the kind of tone people used when they had already given up halfway. The demonic energy was gone, purified completely, but the lingering, alluring scent problem was another matter. It wasn't something holy power could neatly erase. It messed with the mind, not the body. So for now, the only solution was a protective barrier placed around Leona. And then came the best part. Regan was the one who ended up restrained, both hands chained to suppress any sudden impulses. The priest warned them to avoid anything indecent until the high priest arrived with a better fix. Both Leona and Regan stared in shock. They were thinking the exact same thing. What kind of disaster did this man imagine happening in this room? Naturally, the gods were having the time of their lives. Restraint is Love called the scene wild and intense, especially with Regan tied up. East over West casually pointed out that Regan was obviously the one weak to pheromones. Cavity King went as far as saying whoever started the pheromone idea deserved an award. Between heavy breaths and pure irritation, Regan finally demanded to know what pheromones even was. The gods happily explained it like it was a fun science lesson. One person became a walking bottle of irresistible perfume, and the other lost all sense of reason over it. All for population growth, of course. Leona, instead of being horrified, immediately saw opportunity. If pheromones worked like that, then maybe Regan could be the one to carry a baby. Scene crafting artisan confirmed it was technically the point of the trope. Leona didn't hesitate. She suggested Regan should be the one giving birth, Regan yelled that she'd completely lost her mind. Unfazed, she reasoned that mages moved less than knights anyway, so logically, it made perfect sense for him to handle pregnancy. Then she leaned closer with a dangerous smile and offered to help. Regan looked genuinely terrified. That made Leona burst out laughing, tears and all, admitting she'd never actually do that. She did, however, want to help him. Just not in whatever scenario his brain had jumped to. Before Regan could protest, Leona raised her fist midair. She explained this whole mess was because of the scent. No smell, no problem. And without a nose, smelling wasn't really an option. Her logic was so insane that Regan panicked for his nose's survival. While Leona eagerly talked about making it quick and painless, Regan seriously considered whether surrender was worth it. In the end, pride won. Using his magic, he snapped ice chains around Leona's arms and removed his own restraints. Just like that, the tables turned. Leona immediately pouted, accusing him of using magic over a harmless joke. Now free and very done with everything, Regan slowly walked toward her like a man who had reached his limit. He reminded himself of everything he'd suffered. From being flustered because their hands were stuck together, drenched by seawater, and now losing his mind because of her sweet scent. Holding her chin, he smirked and told her to beg for forgiveness. Maybe then he'd let her off easy. When she didn't respond, he teased her, asking where all that confidence went. Instead of an answer, she sneezed directly into his face. She apologized casually, saying she tried to hold it in, but the chains were too cold. Then she asked what he was saying because she'd been too focused on not sneezing to hear him. But as always, her thoughts took a sharp left turn. She announced she had a brilliant idea. Regan shut it down immediately, saying her ideas were usually worse than a kindergartner's. She ignored him anyway, and asked how long he could keep the ice magic up. When he admitted maybe 30 minutes in his current state, Leona suggested giving him a cold. A stuffy nose meant no smelling pheromones. Even the gods couldn't defend this anymore. They commented on the hopelessness of the situation and the intense secondhand embarrassment radiating from Regan's suffering. Imagine going from a nose-breaking plan to switching to a shot shield. Suddenly, the high priest arrived in a hurry after hearing there was trouble. What he walked into was Leona chained up and Regan standing over her. From his POV, Regan looked one step away from pouncing. He panicked and immediately cast divine judgment. Thunder struck Regan in a blinding flash. When the light faded, the pheromone effect was gone. Regan stood there disheveled, while the high priest apologized profusely for misunderstanding the situation. Regan didn't argue. He said he understood why it looked bad. Truthfully, it wasn't entirely wrong. His earlier words about making Leona beg replayed in his head, right on cue for Captain Trashbag and Spinny Spin Spin to tease him endlessly, repeating his own words. Leona thanked the high priest for always helping them. Nathaniel humbly replied that they were the ones who had suffered the most, facing demonic beasts head-on. The exchange of laughter between the two immediately stirred jealousy in Regan. He walked past the high priest, declaring that the examination was over and that he was leaving. Left behind, Leona noticed something strange. One of the familiar voices was missing. Then it hit her. It was the angel. When she asked the gods, they explained the angel had gone to investigate the vampire clan and the demon king. With the angel being busy, the gods wouldn't be visiting the channel for a while. Leona decided that meant peace. Nothing annoying would happen for now. Tomorrow was the weekend, and she wouldn't even have to see Regan's face. At least, that's what she thought. Leona didn't even knock when she got home. She marched straight in and hugged her grandmother so hard it nearly counted as a surprise attack. Countess Avenin Everhart, the first woman to ever become head of the family, took it like a champion and laughed it off. When asked about her first day on the job, Leona immediately complained that it was exhausting, and that way too much had happened for a single day. The Countess only laughed harder. Of course it was tiring. Defending the nation wasn't exactly a desk job. Then Leona noticed her grandmother was wide awake even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. When she asked why, the answer came out with sparkling eyes and zero shame. Episode 15 of her favorite romance drama was being released that day. She'd been waiting for it so badly she couldn't sleep. Leona immediately recognized the show. It was the one everyone had been obsessed with lately, where operas were recorded into magic orbs, and delivered straight to people's homes. Right on cue, a smiling attendant named Hugo showed up to announce that the episode had arrived. That was all the invitation Leona needed. She sat down with her grandmother, ready to witness whatever chaos episode 15 had prepared. Before long, both of them were completely absorbed. The story had reached that stage where no one knew who the heroine's child's father was, even though there were only 3 candidates. As Leona watched, she started to realize why people loved this stuff so much. It was messy, dramatic, and oddly addictive. It even crossed her mind that maybe the gods watched humans the same way, snacks in hand, judging every bad decision. At one point, one of the male leads did something so ridiculous that Leona thought that even Regan wouldn't go around kicking people like that. Her grandmother just smiled and reminded her that it was only a show and not to take trash men seriously. Then she added, very seriously, that Leona should never involve herself with men like that in real life. That was when another voice joined in from behind, saying that trash or not, all men were the same. It was her mother, Isolde, first female magistrate and also the first divorced woman. Leona knew the drama on the screen was messy, but compared to her own family history, it barely scratched the surface. Her mother had sued her cheating husband and completely destroyed him in court. Her grandmother had stayed loyal to her late husband, fought off side branch nobles like starving hyenas, and rose to become the first female head of the family. As for Leona's father, he was memorable in the worst way. A wannabe actor whose only real asset was his face. He insulted better actors, flirted with anything that moved, and somehow thought the world owed him applause. A total disaster. Leona still couldn't understand how her mother ever fell for him. Maybe it had something to do with her getting pregnant. Seeing Leona's expression darken, her mother gently reassured her that none of it was her fault. It was her mistake, not Leona's. Her grandmother chimed in, saying the real issue was her daughter's weakness for pretty faces, something she'd warned her about plenty of times. Her mother touched Leona's cheek and added that giving birth to her was still the best decision she'd ever made. That stuck with Leona. She wondered if she'd ever feel the same way if she had a child of her own. Then reality kicked in. At the moment, the chances of that happening were basically non-existent. She couldn't even begin to picture herself as a mother, let alone having a child with Regan. Once the sun was fully up, Leona headed straight into the already noisy market and made a beeline for the blacksmith shop. The moment she stepped inside, the familiar clerk Percival greeted her like she'd been waiting all morning. When Leona said she was there to buy a weapon, Percival joked that she must have finally saved up enough. Leona smiled and said not really. She'd just gotten a little bonus recently. What she didn't say out loud was that she also hadn't forgotten her deal with Regan. With that in mind, she confidently ordered a super rare SSS rank dagger set. Leona wandered around the shop, eyes sharp, already thinking that if she was spending Regan's money, she might as well look properly. That was when she accidentally bumped into Cillian. Cillian immediately panicked like a cornered animal until someone scolded him for being rude. That was when the man beside him introduced himself as Dex Tristan and casually offered a handshake. He said they were colleagues now, so there was no need to be stiff. Leona noticed right away that his grip was a little too strong, but she let it slide. When she asked if the two knew each other, Dex admitted they had only met yesterday. The dungeon incident had thrown them together, and somehow they'd grown close fast. He then asked if Leona was all right after what happened in the dungeon. So, she quickly said she was fine. When asked what they were doing at the shop, Dex glanced at the collar nearby before answering. He explained that he was helping Cillian pick out a weapon. He also casually admitted that he was a necromancer. According to him, they had to leave the Beastkin village in a hurry, and Cillian had forgotten his weapon in the chaos. Cillian, clearly trusting him, happily added that Dex had promised to buy him a new weapon, give him money, and even share food with him. He said it all with sparkling eyes, like he'd just found the nicest person in the world. Leona didn't comment, but she definitely noticed Dex's earlier glance at the collar. Something didn't sit right. Perfect timing saved her from digging deeper. Percival called her over and presented the dagger set she'd ordered. When it came time to pay, Dex suddenly offered to cover the cost as a sign of friendship. Without missing a beat, Leona cheerfully said to charge it to the Grand Duchy. That was when Dex asked if she and Regan were dating. Leona denied it so fast it almost sounded like a reflex. Once outside, Dex offered to treat both Cillian and Leona to a meal since she'd helped with choosing a weapon. Like a pair of simple-minded kids promised free food, Leona and Cillian both brightened immediately. That was when they noticed murmurs spreading through the street. It didn't take much guessing to figure out that the Emperor was about to arrive for an inspection. Leona suggested taking a shortcut through a nearby alley to avoid the crowd. They didn't even make it 2 steps before a small boy suddenly jumped into Leona's arms, clinging to her and crying while calling her mom. The little boy had silver hair and ocean blue eyes. Way too familiar. While trying to calm the kid down, she briefly wondered if the angel and the gods had done something insane again and turned Regan into a child. Still confused, Dex asked how a kid she'd never met could look exactly like Regan, and even wondered out loud if this was actually her child. Leona denied it over and over, but when she looked down, the boy smiled at her so sweetly that it nearly broke her concentration. Little Regan looked like an angel in her eyes. There was no time to stand around. Leona told the boy to hold on tight and declared that she was heading straight to the Holy See. If the gods or the angel were involved, she was getting answers in person. Dex and Cillian didn't hesitate to follow. Cillian went along without thinking much about it, while Dex quietly noted that whatever this situation was, it might be useful someday. As they rushed, Leona kept insisting that the boy was probably Regan's cousin or nephew. Dex pointed out that House Clanford barely had any heirs. Aside from the Grand Duke, Regan was basically it. That was news to Leona, who avoided social gatherings like plague zones. It also hit her then that she barely knew anything about Regan at all. They were forced to stop when they reached the exact area where the Emperor's inspection was taking place. With no other option, Leona jumped straight onto the rooftops, the boy still in her arms. Her red hair made her impossible to miss. Dex followed on his summoned creature, while Cillian ran after them at his own pace. Below, people stared. Reporters went wild. A red-haired woman carrying a silver-haired child was already strange enough, but silver hair meant only one thing to them: House Clanford. When they realized the trio was heading toward the Holy See, pens practically caught fire. By the time Leona disappeared from sight, the juiciest gossip of the day had already written itself. At the crack of dawn, Isolde was still half asleep when she complained about the noise coming from the front gate. The butler calmly explained that a crowd of reporters had gathered outside, which immediately sent Leona's mother into a mild panic. That panic didn't last long. The moment the butler added that it was about Leona being caught in a scandal with High Priest Nathaniel, her reaction flipped completely. Instead of worrying, she relaxed. For one simple reason. Leona had never shown the slightest interest in men. Not even once. She didn't listen when told to try dating, didn't pretend to care, and definitely didn't look like someone who would secretly romance a high priest. To Isolde, the rumor sounded so ridiculous it barely deserved attention. The Countess joined her and casually asked about the gossip floating around. Both women laughed it off until the butler insisted they at least read the paper. The laughter died instantly. Right there in print was a headline claiming Leona was involved in a pregnancy scandal. At that point, both of them stared at the page and wondered what kind of soap opera nonsense they had just been dragged into. On the other hand, Nathaniel was having a meeting with his superior, who gave him a light scolding mostly out of formality. Nathaniel hadn't done anything wrong. The truth was that Leona had shown up yesterday, demanding that he summon the angel because Regan had supposedly turned into a child. The problem was that no matter how much he prayed, the angel hadn't responded. All he could do was ask Leona to wait in one of the Holy See's guest rooms. His superior laughed about it, and even joked that a child inheriting Nathaniel's divine power would be a blessing. Still, jokes aside, he couldn't deny that the little boy truly resembled Regan. There were differences, though. When he remembered Regan as a child, the boy had always had a cold, sharp gaze and spoke far too well for his age. This child felt softer. As for the rumors, the man said he would request a correction from the newspaper and send official letters to both the Countess and the Grand Duke. With that settled, Nathaniel bowed and left. Once outside, Nathaniel sighed. If a child with powers like his really existed, someone who could help the world, he had to admit the idea was intriguing. Back in the guest room, Leona was still fast asleep while the little boy shook her desperately, asking for food. No matter how hard he tried, she didn't budge. It wasn't until a loud bang echoed from the door that she finally stirred. Groggy and annoyed, Leona opened the door to find a very angry Regan standing there, demanding to know about the newspaper article claiming she had a secret baby with the high priest. She immediately grabbed his face and patted his body just to make sure he was real. That was when a small voice behind her called her, "Mama." So if this was Regan, then who exactly was the kid behind her? Sadly, neither of them had an answer. After Leona explained everything, Regan finally cooled down. He stared at the boy and muttered that he didn't understand how such a dumb-looking kid could possibly resemble him. Leona instantly covered the boy's ears and scolded Regan for not watching his mouth. As usual, the two of them slipped into bickering like it was second nature. So the kid started crying. Leona panicked and hugged the boy, trying to calm him down, but this time it wasn't working. Regan sighed and casually suggested using a sleep spell. She was horrified. That spell was meant for enemies. Regan, confused by her reaction, admitted that was how he'd been raised. His father would knock him out with a sleep spell whenever he fussed. He even promised to make it painless, completely missing the point. Leona stopped him and said that kids cry because that's normal, and what his father did to him wasn't right either. That left Regan stunned. In the end, he backed off and followed her lead. He'd always thought Leona was a clumsy oaf, but watching her now, she actually looked like a decent guardian. When he glanced at the boy again, though, he noticed the kid grinning at him like he'd just won something. Then there was a knock at the door. The high priest asked for Leona's input on the official statement being prepared. Regan opened instead, and Nathaniel's confusion only deepened when he saw Leona still holding the child. After a quick explanation, he left again, saying he would handle the false report first, and advised them to stay with the child and learn whatever they could. Leona complained nonstop about the angel still being missing, while Regan stared at the boy and finally admitted that he really did look like him. He recalled how furious he'd been that morning, and even briefly wondered if his father had secretly given him a younger brother. Thinking it through, Regan suggested this might be caused by a distortion in the space-time axis. Then, blushing, he reminded her of what the angel once said. There was a chance this child could be theirs from the future. Leona immediately made a sound like someone about to throw up. Both of them agreed that the thought alone was enough to make them sick. Suddenly, the angel finally appeared, crying as she called out to both of them and admitted that she had messed up. The angel finally stopped sobbing long enough to confess what she had done. While investigating how the vampire clan ended up siding with the Demon King, she decided to peek into the past. It was supposed to be a quick look. Instead, she poked where she shouldn't have, tore a hole in space-time, and accidentally dragged someone through. That someone was now a small boy clinging to Leona. Leona gently told the angel to calm down first so they could actually fix the mess instead of crying around it. The first question was obvious. Who exactly was this kid? Since he popped out while the angel was looking into the past, did that mean he was Regan as a child? The angel gave a very unconvincing answer and said it was probably the case. Regan immediately pointed out that at that age, he was busy memorizing magic formulas and definitely not acting like this. His conclusion was that the child must have been altered while passing through the broken space-time rift. Something went wrong on the way. Leona lifted the boy and nodded along. So the problem wasn't just time travel, it was a damaged delivery, which meant their job was simple in theory: send the child back. Regan suggested asking the gods for help. He admitted they were annoying, but there were gods from other dimensions who might help. All the angel needed to do was open her dimensional stream. That was when the real problem hit. The angel had no power left. She had used everything digging through the vampire clan's past. The only solution was for Leona and Regan to keep the child with them for 2 days while she recovered. As if that wasn't enough, the angel warned them that the boy couldn't come into contact with anyone else. If he did, things could spiral into an even bigger mess. That meant no help, no handoffs, and no excuses. They were the babysitters. Before vanishing to recharge, the angel tossed something into Regan's hand and said she had found it inside the space-time rift where the child came from. Then she disappeared like nothing happened. With no other choice, Leona and Regan agreed they couldn't take the child to either of their family homes, so they headed to Regan's safe house instead. The moment Regan activated the spell, a massive mansion appeared. It looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. Leona stared at it in silence, before commenting that it didn't feel like Regan at all. He admitted it was a gift from his mother. Inside, Regan quickly prepared a baby crib and motioned for Leona to place the child inside. The moment she did, the boy started crying again. Leona blinked in confusion. She had fed him on the way over. Then, as if it were the most casual thing in the world, she asked if Regan had made a poopy. Regan immediately snapped at her not to call the child that. Leona laughed and pointed out that the kid was technically also Regan, so asking if Regan made a poopy was fair game. She repeated it just to annoy him. Deciding not to fight a losing battle, Leona asked if Regan had a childhood nickname they could use instead. Turns out he didn't. He had only ever been called Young Lord or Young Master. That explained a lot. Leona quietly realized just how cold his upbringing must have been. It was nothing like her own family. In the end, she settled on calling the boy Kiddo. With that decided, she smoothly handed the child to Regan and suggested he play with him for a while. She pointed out that she had dealt with the kid all day yesterday and was completely sleep-deprived. She needed rest. Once she recovered, she'd take over again. Whether Regan was ready or not, his turn had officially started. 3 hours later, Leona woke up feeling refreshed. However, the first thing she saw was the kiddo shaking Regan awake while calling him Dada. Regan, meanwhile, was sprawled on the couch like a man who had fought a war and lost. He looked less asleep and more expired. Leona picked the boy up and casually commented that his stamina was terrifying, easily matching the strength of 7 knights. The kid laughed like it was a compliment and happily called her Mama. She found it cute, sure, but also confusing. She wondered aloud why the child kept calling her Mama and asked if she really looked anything like the Grand Duchess. Regan quickly disagreed. Curious, Leona then asked what his mother was like instead. Regan answered after a short pause. He described his mother as someone completely opposite from Leona. His expression dipped just enough for Leona to notice, but she decided not to push it. She simply commented that the Grand Duchess must be a very quiet and gentle person. Changing the topic, Regan said the child must have left them a clue inside the subspace ring. When Leona asked what that even was, he explained it was an heirloom of the Clanford Grand Duchy, used to store items inside. When he checked it, there was only one thing inside: a book. Leona recognized it instantly. It was a fairy tale she had read over and over as a kid. Cinderella. The girl covered in ash who somehow win over a prince's heart with one glass shoe. Leona plopped down beside Regan and offered to read it to the kid. She started from the beginning, reading about Cinderella's hardships and the fairy queen appearing to help her. Everything was going fine until the page showed Cinderella and the prince kissing. The kid pointed at the picture with excitement and announced that it was Mama and Dada. Leona paused. Then she said that if she were Cinderella, she would never marry a prince like Regan. Regan didn't miss a beat and said there was no way he'd marry an idiot like her either. That was when the kid placed his tiny hand on the book. Before either of them could react, the world flipped. Leona found herself inside a cellar, holding a broom. A woman yelled at her, calling her Cinderella and scolding her for slacking off. She was ordered to clean the drawing room while everyone else went to the ball. Then the door slammed shut. Leona was completely stunned, but it didn't take long for her to realize what had happened. The child had used real magic at such a young age. More importantly, she now remembered how this story ended. Cinderella kisses the prince, which meant her kissing Regan. Leona snapped the broom in half with pure strength and shouted that she would rather die. Right on cue, the child appeared through a magic portal. Leona stared at him as if her brain had stopped working. While the child happily waved, another voice complained that he should stop because he was making her dizzy. Then he opened his hand and revealed a tiny fairy. After catching her breath, the fairy queen straightened herself and announced her role as the guardian of the tale. She explained that the story would only end once Leona completed the song and dance with the prince. After that, they could all go home, and she could clock out on time. She pulled out a dress catalog and urged Leona to hurry up and choose. With no real choice, Leona picked a dress she thought would be best for escaping. Something easy to move in. With the fairy queen's magic, the makeover was done in seconds. Of course, it came with the usual warning. The magic would disappear at midnight, so she had to return before then. Luckily for Leona, She just happened to be the fastest runner in the academy. Meanwhile, over at the Imperial Palace, Regan accepted his fate with the calm of a man who had already given up arguing with reality. His aide politely informed him that tonight was the royal ball and that the prince needed to prepare immediately. Regan didn't need the explanation. One glance at the palace, the timing, and the ridiculous setup told him everything. The story would not move unless he played along. And if this all started because of the kid's magic, then the fastest way to find Leona was to follow the script and get it over with. So he let himself be dragged into preparation. The aide enthusiastically explained the beauty routine, as if this were sacred knowledge passed down through generations. The prince was required to bathe in a mix of Ruel mountain honey, goat's milk, and rosewater. The prince's beauty regime was, without question, peak insanity. After what felt like a lifetime of scrubbing, soaking, grooming, and being stared at by far too many professionals, Regan finally emerged fully dressed. He wore a white formal suit that somehow made his silver hair brighter and his blue eyes sharper. The servants were practically vibrating with excitement, already imagining how every young lady at the ball would lose the ability to speak. Even if that happened, Regan knew Leona wouldn't notice. Still, one thought slipped in anyway. This would be the first time he'd see her in a dress. He immediately followed that thought with another one. It probably wouldn't suit her at all. Minutes later, Regan sat at the ballroom, waiting and waiting. He was already convinced she was deliberately late when the announcer finally called out her arrival in a voice that sounded dangerously close to panic. The room exploded into whispers. People gasped about how scandalous her outfit was. They stared at the high slit of her dress like it was a personal attack. Regan looked up and promptly forgot how breathing worked. The man who had confidently decided dresses wouldn't suit her was now standing there completely stunned. Then Leona marched straight up to him and demanded he give her shoe back. That was when he noticed she was barefoot. She had walked into the royal ball like an unhinged young lady, wearing a high-slit dress and barefoot. And judging by her expression, she truly didn't care. To her, this was just a fairy tale. She hurried him along, saying she needed the shoe back so she could throw it in his face before midnight and escape. Regan, still trying to recover, asked why he would even have her shoe in the first place. Leona immediately blamed one of his men for taking it. So here's what actually went down an hour earlier. Leona had been sprinting, with stares appearing as if they were personally out to ruin her day. By the time she reached the palace, she was breathing like she'd just finished a marathon she never signed up for. One heel was already giving up on life, so she removed her shoes and went fully barefoot. That should have been the end of it, but of course it wasn't. One of the guards stopped her and said she couldn't enter the palace while carrying a weapon. Leona stared at him and tried to explain that it was, in fact, footwear. The guard didn't budge. To him, it was a throwing weapon. With great seriousness, he confiscated the shoe and promised to return it when she left. Fast forward to the present, and Leona was back to arguing with Regan like usual when the realization hit her. Midnight was only an hour away. No shoe meant no dramatic escape, and no escape meant getting stuck in a fairy tale, which was absolutely not on her to-do list. They needed that shoe now. Regan ordered the chamberlain to find it immediately, but as that was happening, he noticed people beginning to cluster together, whispering and staring. A mysterious, beautiful woman, barefoot, dressed provocatively. Gossip spread faster than fire through dry grass. Rather than to explode in irritation, Regan led her out of the ballroom, using the search for her shoe as an excuse. He didn't fully understand why it bothered him, but hearing people talk about her like that made his stomach turn. At the entrance, Leona questioned another guard, who said the earlier one was named Hans, and that he'd gone to the storage room with the chamberlain. That was all they needed to hear. They stormed the storage room and found Hans, who immediately bowed and apologized. He admitted the chamberlain had already taken the shoe, saying the prince wanted it. Hearing this, Leona looked like she was seconds away from ripping her own hair out. With time slipping away, Leona charged off and grabbed the chamberlain by his necktie like an angry lioness who had officially run out of patience. She demanded to know where her shoe was, and judging by her expression, the wrong answer might have been fatal. Sobbing, the chamberlain confessed that when he returned and found them gone, he assumed the shoe was valuable and stored it in the prince's room. So they ran. It was the kind of running fueled by pure panic, and by the time they reached the room, Leona finally got her shoe back. Unfortunately, The clock struck midnight at that exact moment. The magic vanished instantly. Her dress dissolved, leaving her standing there in a thin, long white nightgown. Mortified, she hurled the shoe straight at Regan's forehead, yelled at him to stop staring unless he wanted to die, and bolted out of the palace. Regan stood there in stunned silence, with a very obvious bruise on his forehead. He sighed to himself, thinking that getting tangled up with Leona was always chaos. Blushing, he desperately tried to convince himself he hadn't seen anything earlier. Then his aide rushed in, panicking when he saw Regan's face. Regan brushed it off and told him to go look for the young lady instead. When asked if she should be arrested, Regan immediately said no. Inside, he told himself it was all just an act so they could leave the story. Out loud, he muttered that he wanted to see her again. Sometime later, the Fairy Queen asked Leona what happened at the ball, since weird rumors were spreading like wildfire. Leona waved it off and said nothing happened. The Fairy Queen, however, was irritated. She complained that she'd given the prince the address and told him to come that morning, yet he was still nowhere to be found. Just then, an announcement rang out, saying the prince had arrived to meet Cinderella. Leona opened the door and found Regan standing there with the shoe in hand. The little boy lit up instantly, greeting him and calling him Dada. The people behind them filled in the gaps on their own. They assumed the prince held the ball because he couldn't forget her. Someone else added that she must have misunderstood and thought he abandoned her and their child. The plot sprinted forward without any effort from Leona or Regan. Then the chamberlain urged Regan to kneel and present the shoe. Annoyed but resigned, he did it anyway, earning cheers from the crowd. As Leona and Regan stood there wondering what came next, the little boy cheerfully suggested, "Kith." Kissed. Leona expected Regan to refuse. Instead, he gently took her hand, looked her in the eyes, and placed a soft kiss on it, deciding that was enough. The little boy beamed and proudly announced that his mama and Dada kissed. After the fairy tale chaos finally wrapped up, a portal opened and dumped the two of them right back into the real world. Then, Regan noticed something. Leona wasn't facing him. He had assumed she'd brush it off like usual, maybe wipe her hand on her sleeve and move on. But instead, she stood there stiff and flustered, clearly doing her best to pretend nothing happened. That reaction caught him off guard more than the entire fairy tale thing did. Before he could think too much about it, the angel suddenly burst into tears and rushed over, asking where on earth they had been. She had finally fixed the space-time mess and came back only to find both of them gone, which understandably sent her into full panic mode. Of course, even the gods showed up too. Cute Bun Leader demanded to know where little Regan was, having practically sprinted over like a crazy dog that heard a snack bag open. Pure Love Only chimed in, saying she'd heard the whole thing turned into a childcare story and wanted to know if it was finally over. Leona was genuinely happy to see Angel and the gods again, but that relief faded when she realized something important. The kiddo was gone. That pretty much confirmed it. The child must have returned to his original world. Leona remembered him waving happily and saying his bye-bye to both of them before disappearing, and the thought left her feeling strangely sad. Angel, still emotional, admitted that fixing everything had taken an absurd amount of divine power. This wasn't some easy patch job, and she made sure they knew it. Leona immediately praised her, saying she'd worked incredibly hard. Regan, on the other hand, dryly pointed out that none of this would have happened if Angel hadn't caused trouble in the first place. Later, Leona stretched her arms and let out a tired sigh, saying it had been exhausting, but somehow they got through it again. Then she turned to Regan and casually asked if, despite everything, it had been more fun than expected taking care of the kiddo. It was tough, sure, but still. Regan said that he thought she disliked children. She corrected him right away. It wasn't that she disliked them. It was just unpleasant being associated with him. That earned a quiet sigh from Regan, who muttered that the real problem was him. For once, Leona stopped teasing. She admitted the truth instead. She said she'd never thought positively about having a child because of reality. Losing combat strength was one thing. Then there was the non-stop nagging about marriage and kids, and as nobles, that noise would only get louder and more annoying. She said she wanted people to choose their own lives with pride and live fully with the results of those choices. That was why she worked so hard to change society herself. She didn't know how long it would take, but she wasn't backing down. Then she joked that by the time she married by her own choice, maybe she'd end up with a cute younger guy. Regan didn't argue. Instead, he calmly said that the first female valedictorian had already appeared, so change probably wouldn't take that long. Then he walked away, leaving Leona standing there, wondering if he had just complimented her or if her ears were messing with her. But in the end, Leona admitted to herself that Regan wasn't as terrible as she'd thought. And maybe spending the rest of the year as partners wouldn't be so bad after all.